Detroit Pistons beat writer James Edwards III joined Mike Scotto of Hoops Hype on the Hoops Hype podcast to discuss all things about the Pistons offseason. They covered the president of basketball operations position, the coaching position, what's going to happen with Troy Weaver, as well as a heap of stuff on who the Pistons could look to add in free agency and trades this summer. So we're going to talk about all of that in just a moment.
Lane, skies a jam. Dynamite dunk and the crowd loves it.
Welcome back to Pistons Intellect. I'm your host, Jack Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Jack_Kelly_3on3. And if you're feeling so kind, as always, please hit that subscribe button. We're going to continue to pump out off-season content all summer long, or whatever season it is around the world for you. We're going to have everything you need to know about the Pistons right here on the channel, updating you as frequently as possible. So, as I mentioned off the top, James Edwards III of The Athletic, the Detroit Pistons beat writer, joined Mike Scotto of Hoops Hype on his podcast. Mike Scotto, for those that don't know, is kind of one of those insider newsbreaker type reporters. He's not on the level of kind of Woj and Shams, of course, but he's a guy who's very well connected and always kind of he's always kind of in the know. And as soon as I saw James was on his podcast, on the Hoops Hype podcast, which I will put in the description here, because I'm not going to go through the entire thing. I'm just going to go through the best bits that I found interesting. But it was a really good listen. It was about half an hour, heaps of stuff in there. It was all Pistons the whole time. And whilst Hoops Hype isn't like on the national level of like ESPN or that kind of thing, like it's known for like rumor mill and all stuff that we love at this kind of year. So I would definitely go listen to it. There's even a transcript you can read as well, which will be in the link in the description. So I think where I want to start with, because I think it's important to start with the latest we're kind of hearing on the Pistons president of basketball operations position and what's kind of happening in that front office, because I feel like I'm going to get to the free agency stuff in a moment, but a lot of the stuff that's going to have to do with the roster and the draft is going to come down as like a ripple effect from whoever's in charge in this president of basketball operations position and general manager and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, James had some very interesting comments. So I think both of Mike and James kind of discussed, they used James's article he wrote probably a week ago, listing the 5 candidates who are in the running or who are rumored to be in the running for the position. And they kind of went through each one. And after listening to it, it feels like John Horst, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, who's currently the Bucks president of basketball operations, kind of felt like they cited him as, if there is a favorite, like it feels like he makes the most sense right now. Obviously, the Bucks are still in the playoffs at the moment. They're without Giannis Antetokounmpo, but it kind of, the way they spoke about it was kind of like John is from the state of Michigan, which counts for something. He could be looking for a fresh start. Like the Bucks might be looking to go for a new direction if they flame out of these playoffs. He's won the championship with the Bucks in 2021. He might be looking for a bigger deal. As bad as the Pistons season was, they kind of discussed, and I agree, like there's a lot to work with this roster. It just needs a fresh set of eyes and a new line of thinking. And there is some appeal to this team, especially if they get a top 2 to 3 pick in this draft. Even though it's undesirable, it's still a top 3 pick in NBA draft. Like there's plenty of value there. So there's plenty of kind of, whilst the draft capital is a bit limited because of that pick they owed to the Knicks, like this is still, you've got a franchise player in Cade. You've got some young talent here, which is still in the early stages of their career has appeal to teams. Like, so kind of the way they were discussing it felt like John Horst was the candidate that made the most sense right now. And they touched on another candidate in Bryson Graham, who currently is in the Pelicans front office. And James mentioned that Bryson has a great relationship with Monty Williams from Monty's time at New Orleans, as well as James also said that if Bryson was to get the position, he could see Troy Weaver definitely being out of a job and out of the organization, or at least out of the general manager position. And I'll get to the stuff about Monty and Troy in a sec. They discussed the Dwayne Casey one, and Casey, that feels like a real outside shot. So I don't think that's likely. John Hammond, who was a former Bucks president of basketball operations before John Horst, he's currently with the Magic, and they also discussed how they feel like he's an outside shot. He's, like I said, they said he's with the Magic. That team's just on the rise now. Why would he kind of want to leave the state of Florida and start right in the trenches again with the Pistons? When there's something good going on with the Magic, I think John's older and might not be looking to take on a project like the Pistons. So that kind of was a little bit dismissed. And then Neil O'Shea, who is the former Portland Trailblazers head of basketball operations, they said, he obviously had some baggage. There was some stuff that came about him and working in that Blazers front office, which I haven't done a ton of research on it, but I know it was not a great environment to work with him, and there's some very controversial stuff there. But they noted he has ties with Arn Tellem, which I know that will irk Pistons fans, because the Arn Tellem ties and that kind of stuff, obviously that got brought up in the midpoint of the season, and some of the stuff fans weren't happy about was with his son in certain positions in the organization. And he's kind of one of the guys that's been here for the past 5 years, maybe longer. I can't exactly remember, but he's been one of the guys that's been here for a while, and things have not been great. So I think hearing that he has ties with Neil O'Shea, and that might be why. I mean, I'm sure in anything, Arn Tellem has relationships with all these guys, but sounds like Neil O'Shea is an Arn Tellem kind of guy in terms of him getting an interview and that kind of thing, and that's why he's being linked to this job. So I thought that was an interesting tidbit, but they didn't really discuss when we'll know about this decision, when it's going to be made. Obviously, we've heard nothing from the team to date since the actual announcement about a week and a half ago. So, but where it gets interesting, and James kind of noted, because he was asked from Mike about to put a percentage on Monty Williams, and how much, what percentage do you think he's the coach next year? And it's important to note that obviously whoever comes in as this president of basketball operations is going to have full say. But just based on what James is hearing and the situation between ownership and the decision makers, James said, and this was a quote, the situation has gotten weird, alluding to between Monty and front office and that kind of thing. And James actually put a percentage. He put a 60% chance that he thinks Monty's not the coach next year. So that's a significant number. So it's weird, because it feels like, because he was also asked about Troy returning, and James just kind of said, why would Troy want to return and work in an environment where he's being demoted? So to me, it feels like there is well over a 50% chance that they are both gone, and the entire kind of front office, and I'm not sure about assistant coaches, but it feels like there could be a full clean house, because if the head coach is gone, normally a fair chunk of those assistants are gone as well if a new head coach comes in. So interesting, very, very interesting. I've said the whole time, I think a new GM is desperately needed no matter what. I would have been okay with Monty coming back for another season if that's the case, to prove that last year was an aberration and was more a reflection of a poor roster, as bad of a coaching job as he did. But, if both of them are gone, I'm fine with that, because everything from last year, and we're going to get to the roster, there is, apart from Kay Cunningham, and Asar Thompson to an extent, but honestly, there isn't much of a case for keeping anything from last year apart from those things, because it was just so bad. And this rebuild has gotten worse and worse every year when it should be trending up every year. So very interesting. I'm assuming most of you would feel absolutely ecstatic if both Troy and Monty were gone. I've just shared my thoughts, but let me know how you feel. The president of basketball relations stuff, I just went through that. I still think like nothing they kind of discussed was like set in stone, and like, they didn't put like 80% chance on Horse being the president of basketball operations. It was more just a discussion and like kind of looking at the ins and outs of each of these candidates. But the stuff on Monty and Troy was very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. And James has kind of been hinting at in most of his work recently that, he can see a world where Monty's gone. So I know there's a ton of money outstanding. I think he has like $50 to $60 million left on that deal. Someone correct me, but it's a ton of money. But it sounds like, James actually said like that amount of money isn't a lot to a billionaire. And he could see, if he really wanted to, he could see Tom Gore's just selling a slither of his ownership to pay that 60 million out. And it's a great way to look at it. Like we get, as everyday people, that amount of money sounds absurd to us, but to these guys that own NBA franchises, it's not as much. And the Pistons are in a position where they don't have time to wait around anymore. Like they just don't. So, and that kind of ties into the free agency stuff where I want to discuss, because they threw around some names, and just purely in terms of free agency talk, like Tobias Harris has been the name. I spoke about that on a previous episode, but sounds like, and James said this as well, like I think a lot of Pistons fans in general, as soon as they hear Tobias Harris, they think they're offering him like 4 years, the max, and we're going to have him until he's 37. And like, I think it's more of like if the Pistons, their view on Tobias Harris is more like a short-term front-ended contract of, like I discussed on the last episode, like, 2 years at 30 million a year, or 2 years at 35 million a year. Maybe like, and that way Tobias, he has 2 years with the Pistons, or he gets a 2-year contract that takes him through to when he's like 34 years old. Then he has, one final chance to get another big contract before he's kind of fully out of his prime. So that was kind of the Tobias Harris discussion. There was some Miles Bridges chatter, which is very controversial. But the way they discussed Miles Bridges, if he was to become a Piston, it would be in the similar vein of like that Tobias Harris contract. Nothing too long-term, but more so like a short-term deal. Which I'm not sure I have no idea what the market would be for Miles Bridges. So I'm not going to put a value on it, but it sounded like it'd be more like a short-term deal, get him in here, see what happens. Personally, like I would just stay away from Miles Bridges. I don't even think, like, this is really might sound stupid because of all the players we watched last season on this roster and that kind of thing. But like, in terms of like the on-court value he would bring purely as a basketball player, I don't think it comes anywhere near close to outweighing the baggage it brings off court. And just kind of, I think because he's in Charlotte now, like it's kind of, whilst it's not okay, like I feel like fans have just accepted like that's the situation, and it's just that situation. Like I feel like once he goes to a new team, all of that stuff is going to come back to the forefront and it's going to shine. Like people will be questioning the front office, why are you bringing this guy in? And rightfully so. And I just think that's really not a vibe at all I want near this Pistons team. And I don't, doesn't even matter the on-court stuff, but even if you wanted to say, we'll weather the storm and all that, which, once again, I don't agree with, I just don't even think he brings a heap on court to even come close to offsetting any of that. So I would still clear Miles Bridges, but his name was brought up, so I wanted to at least throw it out here. The other two players were Malik Monk and Buddy Hield. James said absolutely he could see the Pistons being interested in those two. Malik Monk, I think in particular, is going to be hot property this offseason. He's been spectacular for the Kings, just as a scorer off the bench, an elite shooter, can create his own shot. Defensively, he's like 6'2", 6'3", skinny guard. So there's going to be some issues there. But in terms of what the Pistons need in shooting and shot creation, at a consistent level, I don't think it gets much better than him as a guy off the bench, or you can put him in as a starter at times alongside K, just to take some of the scoring load off him. So he's proven bucket getter at this point in his career. So Detroit, once again, will be interested in those two. And then the kind of, in terms of like sign and trades and teams to keep an eye on, James threw out teams at the crossroads like the Nets and the Hawks. Been a lot of chatter about them. Nick Claxton's a name I've heard James bring up now a lot. He even just wrote an article today, which go check it out, about a possible how the Pistons could go about their offseason. And once again, Nick Claxton was mentioned. And James kind of mentioned him as someone who the Pistons could sign and trade for. Claxton, I believe, is an unrestricted free agent. So, and just because they get Nick Claxton, that doesn't mean Jalen Duren is gone necessarily. James spoke about how Duren could now be coming off the bench because his lack of rim protection and defensive stuff is just, the Pistons they can't go into next season if Jalen Duren doesn't improve dramatically defensively and expect to get, much better with him defending at the 5. So, I don't know, Nick Claxton's an interesting one. I think he would be a really good player on this Pistons team, especially in the next 2 to 3 years while they're trying to get up the standings and build an identity and figure out who they are. He's a lob threat for Cade. He's a really good rim protector. In terms of rebounding and just interior presence, I think he's I know when the Pistons have played the Nets, like Duren has, I feel like, manhandled him at times. He might block shots, but he's not necessarily the biggest guy. So I feel like if Nick Claxton was to come in, you might see some Isaiah Stewart alongside him if Monty Williams is still the coach. But I feel like, I feel like he would help this team 100%. He fits with Cade. He brings rim protection, which this team desperately needs. So I wouldn't be opposed to that. The other player is Mikal Bridges. I've spoken about Mikal Bridges. I feel like for the Pistons to actually even get him, he still has 2 years left on his deal. They're going to have to trade. For one, the Nets will have to strike out and not get Donovan Mitchell, because I feel like the Nets, from everything I've listened to and read about, they are not looking to rebuild. They want to just keep trying to build this thing around, and they're going to try and star hunt this summer. And, maybe someone like Trae Young becomes available, but it feels like they are going to go hard on Donovan Mitchell because he's from New York or that area, and doesn't look like the Knicks would be a fit for Mitchell per se with what they're building. So it feels like the Nets are going to be all in on Donovan Mitchell. But if they miss out on him, and if they miss out on a Trae Young, and the Pistons can get into the market, it feels like they're going to have to trade. And James actually said this in an article today. It feels like they're going to have to trade. Definitely, they would have to get a top 2 to 3 pick in this draft. So that would be part of the trade package. Definitely Jaden Ivey or Jalen Duren, and probably both, to get in and make a deal. And that sounds like a ton, but, Mikal Bridges is pretty much an all-star talent at a very vital position on the wing. He can score, he can defend. I know he had a down year, but, I love his fit in Detroit. And it would be tough to see. I would like to think the Pistons could get him without giving up both Duren and Ivy. I'm fine with trading this year's pick, because I just don't think the Pistons have time to keep developing 19, 20-year-olds. Because if you continue to do that and you continue to lose games, you will lose Cade Cunningham. That's my biggest fear. That's why I'm open now to trading any of the young core apart from Cade. I'd like to keep Asar, but if you get the right trade, it would hurt to see them go. But yeah, if you lose Cade, I just feel like, what is the point of all of this? It's kind of where we're at. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts on that Mikal Bridges trade. I feel like a lot of people say it's too much, but at the same time, I would say the Pistons this year had their core 4 in place. didn't play a heap of minutes, but we saw it. We saw a lot of minutes of the three of them playing together. I don't think they fit, and I think that's okay. But I think you can't just continue to roll them out together, because I think if that was going to work, you wouldn't have seen this team lose 28 straight games, no matter how young they are in the supporting cast. If there was enough top line talent in these four players, you would have seen more glimpses this season. Like, I'm sure of that. Like, might not be the fairest comparison, but look at the Thunder. Look at them last year. Look at how the Timberwolves closed. I think it was Ant's rookie season, like with Cat, and like you just see more glimpses. Look at the Rockets this season. I know they've got their veterans, but I don't know, man. I just don't think this talent fits together, just with the lack of shooting and the inconsistencies. So I'm okay with moving them if the deal's right. If we move them and the deal doesn't work out, I'll be shattered, but I still just kind of believe, whilst we